spying program continuing to get a lot of attention in the international press as lawmakers move forward with a bill to rein in the NSA.
That's right. Let's start by looking at a cartoon in the International New York Times by Shapat, where you can see Obama reading out these new rules of behavior for the NSA. To the NSA, that looks a lot like Frankenstein there. A little bit, just in time for Halloween. Now, it doesn't look like the NSA is very much, aware of what these changes are going to be. It doesn't look like it's really listening. It doesn't look likely that it's going to maybe change. Maybe the master will lose control of its creation. But all this is getting a lot of attention in the rest of the press, especially the U.S. press, as you can imagine. The director of the National Intelligence, James Clapper, he defends the U.S. spying program, including on foreign leaders in the name of national security. But this is the editorial in the Washington Post today that says, on the contrary, the NSA spying shows just how to lose friends and how to alienate allies. And it says it's one thing to collect foreign internet and phone data and for counterterrorism, but it's another thing to spy on political allies, and this should only be done in very rare occasions and should not happen without the presidential authorization and disclosure to Congress.
Now, the Chinese media is also being very critical, if you like, of the US's spying program today.
Absolutely. China Daily today goes even further and says that the spy scandal will weaken the US's global credibility. And this article actually claims that the US was trying to gather information from China via Japan. And now, China Daily says that Washington will not only offend its allies, but by excessive monitoring, it will harm trust. Now, it's quite ironic to get an article like this in China Daily, given China's own track record on also on internet surveillance. There's another cartoon in China Daily as well that takes a look at this, and you can see here it says, spot the difference. On the one hand, you have News Corporation, so that's that trial that's going on in the UK for the phone hacking scandal. So you can see that journalist there with handcuffs for tapping into people's phone in the name of journalism. Meanwhile, you have Obama there, who's very comfy in his armchair with a cup of tea, listening in freely to the world in complete impunity.
And talking about that phone hacking trial, like we just saw there, it's getting a lot of attention in the international press, isn't it?
That's right. Now, the jury that will decide the fate of the key players was sworn in yesterday with a warning from the judge that you can read on the front page of The Independent today, and that's that British justice is on trial. Now, the jury is 9 women and 3 men. It was chosen after 80 potential jurors were whittled down to those that seemed capable of, hearing the case without bias. But it's a very tricky thing, because the judge, for instance, said that the jury should only consider the evidence presented to them, but there's evidence everywhere. There's information everywhere in the press, and the jury, of course, is reading the press. For instance, the judge held up the copy of November's edition of Private Eye, which is a satirical magazine. Let's take a look at it. There it is. It says Halloween special, and who's on the cover? Well, Rebecca Brooks. And you can't really read it, but at the bottom it says horror witch costume withdrawn from the shops. So the judge actually showed this and said this is typically the kind of thing that the jury should avoid.
Okay, not surprisingly, I suppose. Now let's move on to Egypt, the country's top prosecutor, targeting a comedian for mocking supporters of the military.
That's right. Now this is Bassem Youssef. He's known as being the Jon Stewart of Egypt. The prosecutor ordered this investigation into whether he harmed national security by mocking supporters of General Sisi's in a new series of his very popular show called Al Bernameg. Now, the question is, can a joke harm national security? That's what The Independent wonders today. Sharq al-Awsat, the pan-Arab paper, applauds Youssef for breaking taboos and criticizing everybody, whether it's the Muslim Brotherhood or the military, and says that Youssef is much more than a simple comedian. He's a third option, an option that emerged at the beginning of a revolution, an option that's civil and democratic, according to this article.
And finally, Flo's pulled out a piece about the government in Norway, which has turned to Hollywood for inspiration as to how to cut the country's divorce rate. What's this about?
Well, I've got a question. What's your secret to a long-lasting marriage?
I've made it to 16 years. Calmness.
Calmness?
I'm not quite sure whether I am calm, but attempts to be calm.
Well, according to Norway, it's government intervention.
Yeah.
I don't know if that
okay,
that's
I'm
for,
not sure
for
the government's interfered in my marriage, but anyway.
Well, basically, the government is trying to cut back on Norway's divorce rate, which is about 40%. And the new Minister for Children, Equality and Social Inclusion, Solveig Horn, she says that a good way is for couples to go on dates. And she actually drew inspiration for this from the movie Date Night with Tina Fey and Steve Carell. Their date goes horribly wrong, so I hope that Norwegian couples will have a little bit more luck, but perhaps dates is also a secret to a long-lasting marriage.
Government interference, perhaps they could listen to all my phone calls. That would be the answer, wouldn't it? Flo, thanks a lot. Flo Villeneuve with the international papers on France 24. Coming up, of course, the very latest on the French hostage. We'll be talking to our international affairs editor, Doug Herbert. And according to a Turkish proverb, every Turk is born a soldier, and yet twice the number of conscripts killed in battle committed suicide in 2012. We have a special report on those campaigning for change in the Turkish army after the break.